Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Today's guest is Dan Swift from Numentum. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
For those listening and watching, we were just going back in time to realize how long ago we met. In this social media world, what's interesting to say is, we met in real life first through LinkedIn. But it was in real life at a LinkedIn conference, and oh boy, that's a long time ago.
A decade plus, we decided, right?
Yeah, because I think LinkedIn was I was the head of social media for the Royal Bank then, so yeah, 11, 12, 13. There was 3 years in a row I went to the Financial Services Summit in New York. And we'll use that as sort of a jumping off point. At that stage, LinkedIn had rolled out the social selling index, and originally it was only available to agencies and to larger enterprises. But I mean, that's when this concept of social selling, and obviously it was in the name of the index, was just starting to gain traction. And so we'll use that as a starting point. Like, what was happening in the social selling space then that was probably causing the momentum that was happening at LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I joined, for everyone's edification, I joined LinkedIn as a business leader there in 2012, and I was brought in by Jeff Weiner and the team to launch the social selling business and LinkedIn, the Sales Navigator as well. That was my little baby before I had three real ones of my own. I got a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And going all the way back to that point. Now, social selling, and we can talk about how we define it and all of that, but it's such a new thing. LinkedIn as a platform had been around for 10 years at that point. People were using it and leveraging relationships and getting introduced to things. LinkedIn ultimately wanted to build a product on the network, which at the time was about 150 million members, to help salespeople in particular go and generate meetings and go and generate conversations. So I was brought in to help launch that product. But prior to that, it was a LinkedIn premium subscription that you had an option to go and buy yourself, and had a few bells and whistles on it. But this was a stepping off point for LinkedIn to really go out and build a business line, and that business line now, it's more than $1 billion in revenue, right, for LinkedIn, for Sales Navigator.
Well, this could be a myth, but it's my understanding that one of the catalysts for the rollout of Sales Navigator was, again, data-driven, looking at the number of people on LinkedIn who had sales in their title. And a lot of the revenue previous to that was driven by subscription to Recruiter and premium accounts. And they, again, based on the data, saw there's this untapped area of all of these people on the platform with sales in their title or sales in their roles and responsibilities. And so I'm wondering, am I wrong? Is that is it a myth, or was there something to that? at the time.
No, for sure. I mean, absolutely. And you think of the other business lines as well. Talent Solutions is all about recruiters, right, and in-house professionals and the agencies, etc. And then you've got Marketing Solutions for all the marketers and advertisers, and then Sales Solutions, right? So absolutely. But it was also thinking about how can we empower members, LinkedIn members, to be more productive and successful. That's always been at the core of what LinkedIn's always been about. And launching a premium product that could be purchased on an enterprise basis. LinkedIn felt at the time it was the obvious next place to go after Talent Solutions and Marketing Solutions. So yeah, I don't think there's I think that's bang on in terms of what you've heard.
Were you so? I mean, Jeff Weiner recruits you or brings you in. Were you already walking the walk or an exemplar of social selling? Like, I'm not taking anything from your credentials, but was there something in the online space that, in terms of behavior you were exhibiting that, oh, okay, he's the right guy to launch Sales Navigator?
For sure. So looking back, there's two things that were going on. One was I'd been using LinkedIn, not the earliest of members, but I'd been using LinkedIn since 2004, I think it was. Now, I'd always use LinkedIn. I'm a relationship seller at heart, despite knowing when to challenge and when to go build value. But ultimately, I'm a relationship seller. So I'd been looking to build my network, leverage my network for years and built a pretty robust network. And at the time, prior to LinkedIn, I was selling into the compliance space. So connecting with compliance officers and leveraging who they knew to get introduced to other folks, it was just become an operating rhythm. Now, behind the scenes, LinkedIn obviously has a ton of data on LinkedIn members, right, and their activities. So when the position became available, I was actually referred into LinkedIn through someone who was already working there. And then they did their due diligence on me to say, well, clearly he's a good fit on paper, but he's also a good fit based on data. So yeah, it was very much part of their interview process. I actually interviewed, funnily enough, during Hurricane Sandy, and I was living in Manhattan at the time. And we lost power, so I had to race uptown to the Upper East Side, I think it was, Upper West Side, I forget, to a buddy's apartment to take the final interview with a gentleman, Mike Derrison, who was the VP for Sales Solutions at the time.
I remember talking to someone about talking to Conversocial, if you remember them.
Yeah.
Talked about how Hurricane Sandy was a catalyst for social customer service. Because people realized with all these people that were going online and asking, like, is there power in your area, or keeping each other updated. And this utility in New Jersey realized, oh, we need to have like frontline. The social selling index. I mean, I know you're not with LinkedIn anymore, but I don't know if you still use it as part of your training curriculum or like when in LinkedIn training that I've done, I tell people, yes, selling is in the name, but it really is a metric to show how comprehensively you are using the platform rather than scoring your sales capability per se. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah. 100%. So we don't use it anymore. However, we did do in the early part of the business our evolution as an organization to help companies, because companies did use it a lot at the time. And it's great, right? It gives you a good sense as to whether someone is thinking about their personal brand, thinking about how they're trying to bring value to other LinkedIn members through posting and sharing content and engaging, how they're using the platform to find folks to go and engage with, and ultimately how they're looking to build their network. So yeah, absolutely, foundationally, it makes sense. However, you can have an incredibly high social selling index and be a terrible salesperson.
Yes.
And it became quite apparent, right, that we were running programs sometimes where the top person on the SSI was then removed from the organization for poor performance. It's a helpful index, but also LinkedIn has talked a lot about and constantly has said we're going to remove SSI at some point. It's still hovering around, but I think you've got to be careful if you're using SSI as a metric that you are socially selling well.
Yeah.
Because let's define what socially selling well is. For me, it's way beyond having a robust presence and having a great network. It's how many meetings are you able to generate with the right people at the companies you care about, and how do you then use social as well as all the other channels and capabilities to mature a deal and take that deal through a buying journey. And then after they've purchased, how can you build a relationship beyond a commercial and transactional one into a real relationship that you can leverage for other reasons beyond business, be a human being, you know? So, yeah, it's developed a lot over the years.
Well, I mean, you're talking about like getting back to the fundamentals, and I've talked to sales teams and said, listen, I'm going to show you how to use LinkedIn for your personal brand and how to better prospect and get referrals and so on. But it's about social selling. But if you suck in general as a salesperson, this will not be your salvation. Because
if anything, it will amplify your suckness, because
yes.
if you're not naturally trying to bring value to other people, which is what is at the core of social, bringing value, building relationships, and developing commercial conversations. If you're not wired in that way and are very focused on yourself and what's in it for you, it's tough to socially sell well. It's not going to come naturally to you, you know?
Well, and when you're training a group, are there telltale signs of who's going to be a natural social seller and who's not? And if so, like, what are some of the attributes that make themselves evident?
So,
okay.
Let me answer that in two ways. So there's always people when we run our programs, and we run programs for smaller organizations all the way through to massive corporations, SAP, Verizon, Vodafone, Broadcom, huge companies. And there's always people, whatever the size of company, who just make themselves known in the program and tend to be the ones who lean in and try all the things that we're trying. So they naturally, whether they're extroverted or introverted, that's not it. It's they have a personality where they'll give it a go. They'll just lean in and they'll try it out, right?
Well,
The reason I kind of pause
is it curiosity? Is it looking for an edge? Is it both?
It's both. It's curiosity for sure. The best salespeople I've ever worked with, forget social selling, are the most curious people. They're always looking for an edge, not just against their peers in the organization, but they're always thinking about the other salespeople at other companies who are trying to get the same meeting and the same conversation with the same buyer. And if this can get them into that individual more efficiently and quicker than the competition, then they're all in. But I was pausing when you asked the question because there's also been the polar opposite, where folks have been they've come across in the training session, not as disengaged, but just not those more vocal folks. And sometimes, they've been in business, they're later on in our careers like I am. And because they've got that business acumen, they've now been given a channel to apply that business acumen. And they've got the credibility and the experience. And they've become some of the best social sellers that I've ever worked with. So it's not the younger folks coming into the workforce who are digitally savvy that are always the ones who gravitate to this. It's the ones who have got some experience that they can leverage and relationships that they can leverage. We had one guy, and I'll share this story with you. His network's like 220 people when we started the program. This was a 12-month program. And he literally got all of his boxes of business cards from all of the relationships that he'd ever had, right? And never told me this, literally added, I think at the time it was LinkedIn allowed you to add something like 200 connections per week. Obviously they've cut it down, but and literally programmatically, every week, he told me he did it with a bourbon on a weekend, just plug these names in, connected, built relationships up. He literally added about 3,000 people to his network in whatever period of time that was. Right? So, yeah, seriously. Not every night, I might add. But by doing this, right, and then because he's posting, all of these people are like, great to reconnect. It's been so long. What are you doing now? And whether he was selling to them or picking up an old relationship and leveraging that person to go and get in somewhere else, like he was on fire, like absolute fire. So it can be, you've got to, it's like anything, right? You've got to lean in and go all in. You can't just tiptoe around this. You've got to, live and breathe it.
Well, I was delivering a session to some financial advisors, and there was a mixture in the group. The old guard who had a huge book of business that was paying a lovely, set of fees to them every year. there was no urgency for them to grow their business. They had a well-established book that they were eventually going to sell. The new guys that were looking for an edge, looking to build their book, they were the ones that were the old guard. They were the first ones to leave after the session was over. The new guys walked me to the elevator with questions. Now, when I say old and new, that doesn't mean necessarily age. I'm wondering how much of it is this, I'll call it, we talked about curiosity, but wonder about a sense of urgency or a recognition that, okay, everyone's zigging the old with traditional styles. I'm going to zag. And I'm wondering if that resonates.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that. I don't think it's just financial advice. I think it's human beings.
That industry as an
Yeah,
example.
yeah, exactly. But whoever's trying to get the edge, I think there's still a hell of a lot of education that still needs to be done, because I think there's a lot of folks that still think, and I hate the term, by the way, social selling. We can talk about that in a moment.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that.
But I still think there's a lot of people who are misunderstanding what is possible with LinkedIn, and that it's a slow burn activity and you have to do things over a long period of time. And you don't, but you can absolutely leverage the platform to get a conversation next week. You just got to know how to do it. Going back to what you were saying about that group of people, and it's a really, because I used to, as you know, run the financial services side for LinkedIn as well. Group of people who are sat on that book of business who are waiting to ultimately sell it. You've also got to think about all of the relationships around that book of business and the transfer of wealth, right? And who ultimately you've got to build relationships with the people who might be inheriting that money. So there's a lot of things you can do as a financial advisor to protect the future. But then, yeah, absolutely net new. I mean, that is a huge opportunity. You got to be curious, and you've got to think about relationship building off LinkedIn as you think about it on LinkedIn. There's no separation here. These are people you want to craft relationships with, develop relationships with, mature relationships with, be able to leverage at some point. And you've got to be able to leverage relationships, you've got to give before you ask. You know, that's what it's all about.
Well, you bring up, makes me think of a story. So someone I know who was in the social selling employee advocacy space and has done quite well, was talking to his financial advisor, and he said, my kids are going to get all my money. If you're looking to establish a relationship with them, I'm just curious, how would you do that? And his advisor said, oh, I give them a call. And he said, they don't take my calls. Like, what makes you think I text my kids and they don't want to talk on the phone. And so what makes you say, and like he said, you could just see the color leaving his face, that it was dawning on him that the way people want to be interacted with and so on. And I remember talking to a bunch of financial advisors from a bank, and they said, we're not allowed to text our clients because of regulatory.
Absolutely. Communication.
And I'm not slagging a bank. It's necessary. I mean, that's evolved, but as you've seen, technology advances faster than policy, and consumers and customers want to be dealt with in their own particular way. Technology is, risen to the challenge, but organizations are playing catch up in the cases.
Oh yeah.
Well, let's jump back a bit. So you're at LinkedIn. You're enabling the launch, or you're driving the launch of Sales Navigator. I know we're going back a number of years, but what was the headspace like for enterprises and salespeople? Was it, and we talked about curiosity and urgency and looking for that edge, but because social selling as a concept was nascent, and I know we're going to talk about terminology in a moment, was there an appetite? Was it maybe not so much appetite, so there's a lot more education to
it was tough.
Demand? Oh, okay.
It was tough. So like anything, the early adopters had adopted, they'd bought. And we were at that point where the fast followers were thinking about fast following. And we bought in the challenger model because we had to literally challenge folks, challenge the status quo. The status quo at the time was, and challenge kind of is still to some degree, cold outreach, cold calls, cold emails, things that can be more easily measured, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, that kind of mentality. So we had to absolutely educate the heck out of organizations. And in addition to the corporate business, I also ran the financial services business. So think about trying to move a market there and educate the banks. Oh my goodness, it's taken me back,
Well,
giving
they're
me
known for their lightning
heart
speed.
palpitations. Yes. Well, we also had to build, you remember that back in the day, we also had to build the compliance ecosystem as well for all of the vendors to wrap around LinkedIn and Sales Navigator so advisors can use it. So we had a massive lift to do. But yeah, going back generally to salespeople, it was and the sales leaders, the sellers themselves might buy a subscription online, but we were talking about trying to sell enterprise licenses to Sales Navigator. So we're trying to, back in 2012, engage. We didn't have chief revenue officers then, right? It was senior sales leaders and a lot of chief marketing officers that we were selling to and educating them on what's possible. And shoot, we were figuring out what was possible with the platform as well. So we were learning and then evangelizing and challenging. It was hard. It was hard.
Well, and both your time at LinkedIn, then through to Sprinklr, and now with Momentum, where was the tipping point? Like, where was it, where you saw from clients the realization or the shift in less education required and more there was inbound demand?
Not while I was there.
But since just over the last 15.
I think from what I'm hearing from all my friends who are still at LinkedIn, the companies that have bought, they've had licenses for a long time. The challenge is not necessarily selling net new. It's more about driving adoption of Sales Navigator in an organization. And it's, not an inexpensive platform. So and then you think about all the other investments that companies have made in outreach, SalesLoft, Gong, all of the ecosystem around employee advocacy. There's so much. Vidyard and other video technology platforms. There's so much that companies have invested in, and obviously all the CRM, etc. So it's looking at where this fits is where companies are now, and it's been fascinating because when you think where we went over time when we had the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic and the rise of the SalesLofts and the outreaches and the ability to blast buyers and loads of emails going out and calls and all of that kind of stuff, suddenly companies are looking at the conversion rates from outreach to conversation and going, hang on a minute, how much effort are we putting in here and how many emails are we sending? And the conversion rates are less than 1%. What are we doing? And so it's gone full circle where our business is now going into organizations and saying, you should try a couple of things first, rather than just call and blast the poor individual with an email and call and email and call. How about looking to see if someone could introduce you? And maybe that person's socially active and maybe we should socially engage and perhaps rather than trying to sell immediately, bring some value and give them some content first and then ask for the meeting. It's not rocket science, but when you execute against those motions, there's a whole body of stuff you need to be able to do that well.
Well, but are you finding, so when you're going in and you're making those suggestions, are they landing because people have come to the realization that some of their old methods just aren't working?
The biggest topic of conversation right now, from what we're hearing and what we're being told in the private equity backed organizations in particular, is do we need to change the model of BDRs going outbound, using the tech that's available to them, generating their incredibly low conversion rates, with some exceptions at certain companies. But for the most part, what are we doing? This model is not working. And that's the thing that they're talking about the most right now in the community. So they're scratching their heads. And think about this for a moment. Imagine a company which has got 500 employees, right? And each employee has got, let's say, 1,000 connections, right, on average. There's a way to connect each other up in an organization, right, and then map all of those relationships as a salesperson to the companies and the people at those companies you want to meet, right? That's how I would be selling if I was in a sales position, right, in a private equity-backed organization. I'd be tapping on the shoulders of anyone and everyone just to get introduced to these companies. Why would I possibly want to go cold? And this is the problem, because the leaders and the revenue ops and the sales enablement teams and all, they've been pushing this approach because it had worked initially. Now they're scratching their heads and going, what do we do? What do we do?
We've
And
hit a wall now.
this is, we've hit a wall. And it's also like, think of the damage as well, particularly for some of the lesser known brands that they're doing every single day by literally throwing out thousands and thousands of emails. And then the buyers are like, oh my God, leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I'm opting out. Stop it. I'm in probably 50 salespeople's sequences right now. And I'm like, just stop. It's we've got to rethink it. It's a problem. It's doing long-term damage.
Well, I'm hating the approach where they'll send an email, um, this is your last chance to respond to me. Now I haven't responded to the other four, but now suddenly the shame that you're trying to build with me is going to be the catalyst. Or
Yeah.
and you must face this as well. I get outreach from people that have some sort of automated lead gen on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I have an emoji in front of my name deliberately to trip up their automated systems. And I got an in-mail from two different people from the same firm. One was the founder at like 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. And the message, the subject line was quick question, which is now the catchy 2 words. And the body of the message was the same. And I messaged the founder and I said, this is the second of 2 messages that were identical, asking me to use your service or suggesting that we talk about. I said, I would not put my brand in your hands if this is the way that you would outreach on my behalf.
Right. Yeah.
Never heard from them again. It's like you are spamming people's inbox on LinkedIn and calling that lead generation. So for everyone.
Here's the challenge, right? Where some companies obviously are freaking out because they've got to achieve certain commercial objectives, and their approach is volume. Maybe because it's a low ticket product they have to sell, and it's a numbers game, right? So I understand why they're doing it, but they still can do it way more effectively, right? They absolutely can. My bigger concern is we're mainly focused as an organization on companies that are and have enterprise sales organizations, people selling pretty complex technology or services to organizations. And all the data's out there, right? The consensus purchase, buying by committee, anywhere from 8 through to 20. We think it's probably 30 people around all of that. And they're being told, okay, we've got Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever the technology is, and this is no disrespect to those platforms. They're fabulous when used correctly. But they're being told, right, you've got to use this, and we've got to go essentially blast the people who you want to get meetings with. And these enterprise reps are literally holding their heads in their hands going, this is insane, because I've got 20 companies I'm responsible for. There's 20 to 30 people at each company, and an enterprise sales motion isn't bombarding people with call me. It's like, so that this is where there's a disconnect for me in terms of all, not just those platforms, which are all fabulous. I keep saying they're great, but all of the technology that companies have got and how companies are asking different types of teams to use it to achieve a business objective. I think there's some clarity that needs to, this is why we do what we do. There's some clarity that needs to come to so many companies now that they're just not getting the results they need.
We'll be back in a moment. And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com. Now, back to the show.
You make me think of, you may know Jill Rowley. She said a fool.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yeah, I love that.
It's about, right tools in the right hands.
Yeah.
Is there something inherent with the enterprise customers about because they're longer sales cycles that there's already I'll call it like a natural patience,
Hmm.
or a recognition that we have to be patient. This is a marathon; it's not a sprint, and so many of the attributes of social selling map to that far better because it's about establish a relationship, nurture multiple touch points, multiple engagements, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
and versus like you said, if it's highly transactional, like I want to hit them, I want to sell and close. I'm sorry, like you go for it's about the I don't want to connect with you only to be pitch slapped, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and let's talk about what social selling is as well, right? Because I think that's going to
And
really
isn't.
help us. Yeah, and isn't, right? So for me, I think the term in itself is silly, right? No one is socially selling unless you're selling a digital product to a digital audience and you don't need to engage, right, as a human being to human being. So I think the term is a little silly, but because the industry is familiar with it, you kind of attach yourself to it because it's the easiest way to get recognized and bucketed, etc. But I think about it in this way. I always put myself in the buyer's shoes. So if your email, your call, your LinkedIn message is interesting enough, and that in itself is a skill, the buyer's going to go look to see who sent it. And in that moment, the buyer's making a decision about the person that sent it, right? And you've got to look like the kind of person that's going to bring value to that individual. Otherwise, that's where the process ends. And still in end of 2024, recording this session, right? Still, people's profiles do not evangelize the organization, include a value proposition, include competitive differentiators, include customer proof points. They're more the resume of the CV, right? Still. And so the buyer's looking at it and going, no, I don't want to talk to you because you're just going to try and sell me something. And you've got no affinity to the organization that you're selling for anyway, according to your profile. So no, end scene, right? If they look interesting enough and they do get a conversation, then you can't then go into transactional sell mode, right? So you have a business conversation where you provide value and business exchange ideas, all of that good stuff. You connect on LinkedIn, but you then got to continue to bring value. That's what posting is all about, right? Educating and influencing that person that you're trying to sell to. And if they're not ready to buy now but are in the future, that's why you post to nurture them over time, right? Nurture the relationship. Exactly how you and I have nurtured each other, right? We both post, we've both seen each other. It just works. So social selling to me it's a bit of a silly term. And I see it more when it comes to LinkedIn as its relationships. That's why LinkedIn has always talked about relationships matter. It's about building a network of people that you can lean on, you can bring value to, you can map to the companies and the people you're trying to engage. You can ask for introductions. Like that's what this is, to start conversations. If you're in a deal flow and you're stuck and you need to navigate around someone, that's what this is all about. It's about leveraging relationships to get you to where you need to be with whatever it is that you're doing.
Well, one of the things that I remind people of, say, like, LinkedIn makes your network transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked earlier before we started recording, I used to work in film and television, and the way it was, networking was integral to you finding your next project, your next gig. But you would phone someone up and say, do you know of a production that's crewing up where I could play a role? And then they would say, oh, give so-and-so a call, and you'd give them a call. Well, that person you were calling didn't know you from Adam, and then you would have to do your intro, at the beginning of the call if the call was returned. But now I know through LinkedIn who you know, and I can say, according to LinkedIn, you know so and so. Do you know them well, etc. Or if we share mutual connections, I've already got some implied trust worthiness about myself when I reach out to you, because I reach out to Dan. Dan looks at my profile. Oh, we have 100 mutual connections. It can't be all bad. Or, but those digital breadcrumbs are working in my favor.
Yeah.
And I think this is it's a small thing, but an important thing that often gets overlooked.
100%. And listen, think about Navigator now. Those 100 connections that we might have in common tactical for anyone listening. It's not just who we have in common. It's like, let's look to see, let's go that step further, press one button in Navigator to see out of all of those 100, who's this person worked with before, right? And then if they've worked with them before, you have a much higher chance that, you know, you're going to know the person. So you streamline it down to like 15 people maybe. And then out of those 15 shared connections, who do you know the best to get introduced? I mean, there's ways to do it, but people, we've gotten to a point in sales where it's become management by numbers, activity. If you're not hitting certain activity metrics, then you're not contributing the way you should be. I had one guy, and I posted about this. This is insane. So he joined the organization in February. He was told to do X amount of activity
of this year.
Joined the organization. He said, "I want to try something different. Give me 2 weeks." Took the approach that I've evangelized all the things we're talking about on today's call. Got more meetings in 2 weeks than the rest of the team that he was on had gotten, including the BDR function, leveraging relationships. Was on the shit list, right, for activity because he hadn't done as much, but had been more efficient. He got excused from what he was being asked to do at that company and got basically a green light to just go at it for the rest of the year. And then the head of RevOps sat him down with the chief revenue officer and said, okay, this was in October of this year, so you're crushing it. What are you doing? What are you doing? And he unpacked what he's doing in his process. It was all the things we taught him from a previous program. We got a call from the RevOps guy, and he's like, so I heard you run some programs. And what about this? But what incredible bravery to join an organization and not just slide into what we're being told in today's world, right? He took a bet on himself because he'd done it before, and as a result, we're now signing an agreement to train all of his colleagues. So it's
he would have been, if you didn't do that, he would have been so frustrated. He would have been like the idea of a racehorse being held back, and you just go hang out in the pasture.
But listen, he was on the like I say, he was on the shit list for and still is every single week. He's at the bottom of the report. Yet he's the top producer, not only in terms of as an account executive, he's outperforming on outbound, getting meetings than the BDR team whose job is to do that full time, but also not just getting meetings, like because he's a great salesperson, closing more deals right off the back of the meetings. He's getting meetings with decision makers, right? Not tire kickers, you know. So
he's on the shit list for activity, not productivity.
Yeah, and literally, he was told by his manager, I'll back you for 2 weeks, but if you don't achieve what you need to achieve, which you're telling me you can do, which is get meetings with people in this way, then you gotta slip into what we do as a business. Otherwise, I can't, support you. I'm going to get in trouble myself, you know? Yeah. And that's where we've got to, which is, there's so much frustration across enterprise sellers at the moment. So much frustration.
Well, I mean, we've been talking a lot about LinkedIn. I mean, it's fundamental, it's core, but because you left LinkedIn, you went to Sprinklr, and for those that are less familiar, it's an enterprise level social media management, content management, scheduling, workflow system, size and scale. Now you leave that to found Numentum. So are you bringing together, I'll call it the social enterprise and social selling as an amalgam? Like, talk to me about like the inspiration for Numentum and what your focus is.
Yeah, totally. So there was personal inspiration, and then there was the business side, right? So the personal inspiration was I was getting frustrated at Sprinklr. Nothing wrong with Sprinklr. I was having a great time, but I was a divisional vice president and about 40 people in my organization, and I could only impact the lives of 40 people. And I was very much told to stay in my swim lane and keep executing, which I'm cool with. We were hitting the numbers. Everything was great. But I knew that I get my satisfaction from bringing value to others, and it's a big world out there, right? So it just wasn't enough for me. And the business piece was, it was validated. You know, I had my hypothesis that we could go build a business on this, but it was validated because I was doing workshops and evening classes, and people were paying to come learn while I was gainfully employed at Sprinklr. So I knew I was onto something. This was in the summer. It was in January 2018 when I launched Numentum. So, going up to 7 years as a business, but I'd watched companies, and I've got so many people in my network who are leaders of companies, and all of them were saying the same thing, that we cannot get enough meetings with the right people. So then I started unpacking that. I said, well, let's talk about what we're doing. Does the companies that you're selling to, Do they know who you are? Do they know what your value proposition is? Have they heard of your brand? And what are you doing about that? Oh, we're putting a load of money behind paid ads. And how's that working? Okay, well, have you thought about maybe empowering the very people that you employ to represent your brand? Have you thought about that? That's pretty powerful, right? And get them to post because people trust people. Oh, that's interesting. So the business started very much on the brand side and getting companies to think about employee brand and brand amplification and brand ambassadors. And then once we'd figured that out and got a programmatic approach to that, we then moved into let's talk now about people who are going outbound and trying to get meetings. And what are they doing? And what tech are they doing? And what process do they have? And all of that. So we built a codified set of processes around going outbound. And then we were like, well, what about deal progression? What are people doing when they get stuck? And what tech have they got to use? So we literally built an end-to-end program for companies who you can buy modularly, right? But ultimately, like to help people give buyers experiences that buyers deserve. And that came from both LinkedIn and Sprinklr because we'd seen it both at the individual LinkedIn member level, but also on the corporation level at Sprinklr. So it was just a no-brainer, you know?
Well, as you're having that conversation with those sales leaders, I mean, you're kind of probing, you're trying to get them to be candid about their situation. And in some cases, not trying to like blatantly shame them, but in some of their responses, they're going to be kind of like embarrassing themselves or like being vulnerable, or there's an admission of, yeah, I'm the sales leader, but we're not, hitting the mark. We're not hitting it out of the park. Obviously, or if we were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. How did you navigate that? Like how?
Totally. So when I first launched the business, I leveraged my network, right? I was brought into companies to do smaller engagements with people that had been my bosses. I'd been their bosses. It was initially like leveraging the low hanging fruit of people who wanted to work with me and give me a shot, which I loved as well. After we'd done that, then it was thinking, well, what's the next phase? And the next phase we went through was the pandemic. So obviously everything changed and we had a fantastic year financially during the pandemic because everyone suddenly had to learn how to do things differently. Then there was the post-pandemic world where money was cheap, right? And companies were just all about profitability. So that was a little harder for us because that was when you'd think that, there'd be money to spend on programs like this. Well, there was, but they were spending on technology because you could do more with tech and you could throw more shit at the wall and see what would stick. Right. And then guess what? We're now shifting more from growth at all costs to, I think I said profitability a minute ago, growth at all costs to profitability. Yeah. So then the shift was totally different. And now there hasn't been a load of money around and people are like, okay, so this approach isn't working and we've got to go grow. So we've got to go be profitable. How are we going to do that? And it's been the last year where people have started like literally calling us up and saying, and these are chief revenue officers calling us up and going, we heard about you from so-and-so. We've seen and heard about what you've done. Help us. And it's been this year's been fabulous, you know.
We've been throwing shit at the wall, but it's still throwing shit. So
yeah, help us put a process behind throwing a shit at a wall, if you could, please. Yeah.
So they're coming to you, they're saying, well, we've seen or heard what you've done with some others. Old ways are not paying off. There is, especially in the, startup world, now there's a recognition, I can't just be focused on my next raise. I have to grow the business and it has to be profitably grown. But when you're dealing with enterprises and you talked about like mobilizing employees to be an extension of the brand and sharing, one of the things that I've found, and I'm wondering if you find the same, is something that's not talked about as often as it should, which is culture. That the cliche culture eats strategy for breakfast is the sales leader may want, or the CMO or CRO may want employees to be, an extension of the brand, sharing content and so on. The desire may be there, but the ability to get them to do it, the problem. And what's your experience been in that? And
so true. So yeah, if your culture sucks and people don't want to work at the company that they're employed by, it's quite hard to get them to want to go and evangelize the organization. However, even if the culture sucks and you're in a quota carrying role, whether that's out and out sales or more customer success or support, when you realize that whatever it is you're selling, you're intrinsically linked to it, and your brand is intrinsically linked to the organization that you're selling for, and your conversion rates are going to be higher by having an incredibly robust profile that does tell the buyer more about the company and the company that you represent and who you do it for. When you start having that conversation, even with a shitty culture, right, you realize as a coin operated quota carrying seller, I got to post as well, because I've got to tell my customers what it is that I'm selling. So there's a way to do that. Now, for non-quota carrying people, so these are folks who are not customer facing, right? But we're trying to get them on brand and on message, slightly different talk track. Then it becomes more about, well, your brand and your professional brand is, yes, it's you, but it's also linked to your employment, and not only where you work now, but where you've worked previously. So part of your brand, in terms of putting your best foot out on LinkedIn, is linked to where you're working now. So even if you're looking to get out of here, and this is a great conversation to have one-on-one, even if you're looking to leave the firm, to help you leave the firm, have an incredibly robust profile that includes your corporate experience and the background images and all of that. So there's a way to do it, but you have to talk in a language that is going to resonate with the people that you are trying to shift a mindset around. And too often people get told, well, you've got to get on brand on message. Why? No, I don't. Because you're not telling them what's in it for them. It's and the other part of the thing is, just to put a bow on it, is sometimes you need someone from the outside to come in and say the same thing, but from an organization that isn't your own, on not just this, on any topic. Sometimes that's just what needs to happen.
Well, in some of the examples you've given during today's conversation, when you have a lengthy program with an enterprise, I think of the Heath brothers and Made to Stick and the change management that they talk about. Do you look for what they call the bright spots? People that are already exhibiting the target behavior, because, as you said, it's good to be an outsider sometimes, because that the validation from an outsider can help change. But what really helps change is when a colleague is doing something and this person sees, Mary's like just knocking it out of the park, and so they go to Mary and say, Mary, what are you doing differently? I'm trying this. And there's peer training, peer validation, and so on. Is there an element of that in that you see in your programs as well?
It ties back to curiosity. You'd think that would happen. The curious ones do, okay. But then you've got the folks who don't like Mary and don't like that she's being successful, right? So they're not going to go and have that conversation. Then you've got the lazy ones, right? Then you got the lazy ones who are just not going to do it, not going to do anything. Then you got the ones who are scared of getting out of their comfort zone. Like this, it's all the different personalities that you have in sales. I mean, that's why I loved being a sales manager, because I literally would have a team of people that were completely different and driven by completely different things. And it's like you become more of a therapist, right, than a sales manager half the time. But so that is, yes, you'd hope that more people would go to Mary, and as a vendor and as a trainer, you're looking for the Marys to highlight as the people who are doing things well. Right. But you've got to figure out whether it's an external company like ours coming in, or people listening to this who are trying to do things like this themselves. You've got to figure out what is going to drive someone to change behavior and want to do something and stick with something. And these can't be like one-off things where they learn something, because they're just going to slip into their old ways, particularly if how they're compensated doesn't align with the activities you're asking them to do when it comes to activities like social. And if it isn't integrated into technology, like an outreach or a sales loft, and it can't be measured, then you can't run a program that is going to be sustainable. So there's a lot. That's why we exist, man. There's a lot to think through to make it.
Well, I mean, to your point, if they feel railroaded into it versus like it's packaged or presented, this is this is being rolled out to help you be more
Hmm.
successful versus thou shalt do this because I'm telling you to
Yeah.
are going to be responded to in two different ways. But are there times when you're rolling out a program where you're like, this is doomed because of culture?
Doomed because of culture, doomed because these programs, like any program of this nature, they work when the frontline sales leaders implement it, support it, evangelize it, do it themselves, hold people accountable. It's part of one-on-ones, it's part of team meetings. If during our sales process we're not able to have those conversations, despite it being part of our sales process, but if we're not allowed to, then it's a risk, right? Because those people have to feel bought in from the get go. But fortunately, the way we run our programs, those first line sales leaders get taught ahead of their sales teams. So you can deal with a lot of the challenges and the issues and the naysayers and all of that. So there's
They're not
a
just the person in the room who writes the check. They're in the
yeah,
room to
oh yeah.
be on the same page.
Yeah, and also right at the top of the food chain, like the CMO, the CRO, sometimes even the CEO, they're involved, not just saying, "Hey, we're launching a program," but the expectation is, and that's where I work directly with a lot of these people, is you got to go and optimize your profile. You've got to start posting and evangelizing the organization. You got to open your network up and accept your employees into your own network. You've got to proactively look at a company that an enterprise rep might be targeting and introduce that rep to someone that you know in your network. Like there's a whole mindset shift that has to change at that executive level for these programs to go from like literally being good to great. 100%.
The just as we come to a close, two final questions. One, the social selling is on the way out, and beyond LinkedIn, just when you talk about a comprehensive social selling program or a comprehensive sales enablement, forget social selling as a terminology. When a potential client is asking you how to success will be measured, not just of the program, but post-program after implementation, talk to me about metrics and performance and measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's pretty simple. It's meetings that people are able to generate off the back of what they're learning with people that matter at target accounts. All of that can be measured, tracked, and measured in CRM or whatever technology they're using. Then it's pipeline. So it's self-sourced opportunities that are put into the system of record by the BDM or BDR or AE, and then it's also influenced opportunities that might have come in via another channel through marketing or from the channel organization. And maybe it wasn't the right person, or maybe it was, but it wasn't the right time. And then they'd used an approach like this to get that individual warmed up again and then continued on the process. So that would be a marketing generated opportunity lead, but influenced by what these people are learning. So it's meetings and it's pipeline. And then for companies who are doing more of the transformational piece and they've got slightly longer sales cycles, it's also the pipeline that is closed off the back of this because they're getting introduced to or they're socially engaging actual buyers and the people that influence them. So you're shortening sales cycles because you're getting to the right people faster. And then it's pipeline revenue that closes off the back of this. So gone are the days of you can't measure it. Yes, you can. And gone are the days of like social selling index being the only thing. No, but it's got to be integrated with the technology. Otherwise, it ain't going to work.
Well, it's going back to the fundamentals, like pipeline meetings. And
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an element of you close an enterprise, but then there's expanding within the account, more share of
Oh
wallet,
gosh,
and that's all trackable stuff too.
100% upselling, cross-selling, getting the customer success folk if they've got a number to not only protect the revenue but also go and expand relationships, look for new opportunities. There's so much to all of this. Yeah, 100%.
Well, to close things out, this may be hard to boil it down to one thing, but if you were advising an individual salesperson and a sales leader in a larger enterprise, if there was one thing they could start doing tomorrow that might be a catalyst of change in their social selling efforts, what would it be?
One thing I've got to do three. I'm not doing
Okay,
one. I'm doing
okay.
three.
Break the rule.
One is I'm breaking the rule. I've always broken the rules. I'm not good at it. One is just think about how you're showing up on LinkedIn. right? Put yourself in the shoes of a buyer. Have your buyers critique it, and do they know, based on what you have on your profile, what it is that you're selling, the value that you're bringing, proof points? Do they understand? Right, that's the first thing. And did it bring them confidence in having a conversation? The second one is keep building your network. We literally say every single time you have any form of interaction with people on or offline, connect with them on LinkedIn, right? And then nurture them by posting, right? Tell your network continually what it is you're doing. And there's a whole talk track around that and a training program about that, but post, right? Educate the people that you're trying to sell to and you're connecting with them on LinkedIn. Post, right? So they influence them on another channel, like off cycle when you're having your calls and your meetings, but post to influence them. It's three things.
Well, thank you so much for this. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate your time and everything that you shared, and continued good selling.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.